All right, hello again. So today we're going to talk about urine and urination. So what is urine and how do you get rid of it? All right, so it is important to know the characteristics of urine. It is used in diagnosis of medical conditions. Maybe you've been to a doctor, they've taken your urine sample and run some tests on it. There's some strip tests you can put into the urine and it'll change colors. It'll tell you things like sugar content of your blood, glucose levels, protein content, blood levels, if you have red blood cells in your urine, what the pH is, if you're pregnant. So it is a way to test an easy test, kind of a non-invasive test to see what's going on inside your body. So it is important and a good tool to use to figure out your overall health. So some things that you can look at, even without a strip test, are things like color and odor. And so urine does have color. It's usually clear to a deep yellow. And so what does that tell you? What does urine color tell you? If you are hydrated, right? So if it's clear, you're hydrated. If it's dark, you're not. So that's a good indication of your hydration level. It can also change colors based on taking different drugs or vitamins or things like that. Things in your diet. If you've ever had a urinary tract infection, there's some things like azo standard and urogesic blue. They can turn your urine either orange if it's azo standard or a bright blue if you're taking urogesic blue. So drugs can be seen in, some drugs can be seen in your urine. It can also be cloudy, so if you look at urine and hold it up to a light and you can't see through it, it's got stuff floating in it. That may tell you that there's a urinary tract infection going on. So that's easy. You don't have to have any kind of special equipment to figure that out. The odor. Typically urine has a little bit of odor, but it's not offensive. But over time it does start to build up your ammonia. And so you can tell, like if you have a kid, maybe they've gone to the bathroom, they've urinated in their diaper, and after a little while it has kind of a funky smell. And so that ammonia buildup lets you know it's time to change their diaper. You often smell it in nursing homes where maybe they're not changing the patients as often as they should. So that's a lot of times the smell that you smell in nursing homes is that urine ammonia smell. But it also can be indicative of drugs and some things that you eat. I know one that everybody seems to know about is asparagus. If you eat asparagus within 30 minutes to an hour, then your urine smells like asparagus. And that doesn't happen in everyone. You have to have that particular gene. So if you eat asparagus and then your urine smells like asparagus, you have that gene and you know what I'm talking about. Now you can also check pH, which you would need a strip test to check pH. Typically pH is going to be around 6, so that makes it slightly acidic, but it can range anywhere from 4 to 8. And that pH can change based on diet, so maybe you've eaten a high acidic diet like a lot of citrus fruits, or it can change if you've had things like vomiting or urinary tract infections. So a lot of things can change your urine pH, but it could be an indicator that something's going on if your pH is not in the normal range. So what does urine contain? Well, it's mostly water, but it also has some solutes. About 5% is solutes, and that includes things like sodium, potassium, phosphate, sulfates, all your ions, and also some waste products, in particular nitrogenous waste like urea and uric acid and creatinine. So these are things that you can find in urine. If you find abnormally high things in urine, sometimes you shouldn't expect to find anything in urine, and like sugar and blood. You don't really expect to find that in urine. And if you do, that's an indication that something is going wrong. So if you find glucose in your urine, that could be a sign of diabetes. If you find blood in your urine, that could be a sign of an infection. Protein, that could be an indicator that you're suffering from kidney damage. So glucose and blood and protein, you really don't want to see that in your urine, but if you do, that can be a big old warning sign that something's going on. That's why one of the things they do when you have a history and physical, your first time to a doctor, they take your weight, they take your blood pressure, and they may do a urine strip test because that's a quick indicator of a lot of different things. We don't do a urine strip test here for a lot of different reasons, including cost, and obviously if you're in the online class you can't do it. But there are some websites, you can Google it and kind of learn more about a urine strip test. So if you're thinking about going into the health field, I would do a quick Google search and just see how many things can be determined simply from a urine test. It's amazing how much stuff you can figure out just from a simple urine test. So once that urine is made, where does it go? It goes into the ureters, which are tubes that take the urine from the kidneys to the bladder. Like the kidney, they're retroperitoneal, so they're on that back wall of the abdominal cavity. And then they go to the bladder, where they enter in kind of on the back underside of the bladder. And so let me flip to this next picture, and I'll talk about how that works. So this is your bladder. Here's your ureters, and they come kind of down and around, and this is where they empty into the bladder. And so as the bladder fills with urine, that puts pressure on these openings, and that will close those openings as the urine fills the bladder and the pressure increases. So when the bladder's completely full and there's a lot of pressure in there, that closes those openings and prevents urine from backflowing up the ureter. And so that's one of the reasons you want to empty your bladder pretty regularly. You don't want to increase the pressure so much that for any reason maybe those openings maybe fail, and you would have urine going back, or you're just not letting urine drain in. So if the urine is not able to drain in because the bladder is so full, it's just going to backflow and stay in the ureters, and then actually wind up backflowing into the kidney. So you do need to empty your bladder on a regular basis so that you prevent any backflow of urine. So what is the bladder? It's just a smooth muscle sac. It's a sac that allows for the temporary storage of urine. And in males, there is a prostate gland just inferior to it that wraps around the urethra. And in females, the uterus lies on top of it. And so if you think about the uterus, you think about a baby being in there. As you're pregnant, the baby's weight will start to kind of crush the uterus, crush the bladder, and that makes it so that you have to go to the bathroom a lot when you're pregnant. Let me get the eraser. Okay, and so the other part where the ureters and the urethra all come together, it's called the trigone. So here and here, it makes a triangle. And so this is basically the three openings: the openings to the two ureters, the opening to the urethra. And because this area tends to always have a little residual urine, you never fully empty your bladder, it can be an area that infections tend to persist. So if you get an infection, it's not uncommon, especially in females, because the distance, the length of the urethra is so short. You can get infection in this area because it's dark, it's warm, it's moist. Perfect storm for an infection. So the urethra is the tube that goes from the bladder to the outside. So this is your exit point. It contains two sphincters. It has an external and internal sphincter that have to open up in order for you to void your bladder or to go to the bathroom. The internal one is involuntary. The external one is voluntary. So the internal one is smooth muscle, and the external one is skeletal muscle. So this is the one that you can exercise, and this is one that you have control on. So when you potty train, you're learning how to basically control that one. The internal sphincter is going to be, again, at the bladder urethral junction, so somewhere in here. And then the external sphincter is going to be where the urethra passes through the pelvic floor, so in this area. So again, if you have a strong pelvic floor, that allows you to have a strong external urethral sphincter. A weak pelvic floor can lead to urinary incontinence, where you have leakage. So once you need to go to the bathroom, we call that micturition. So micturition is when you urinate or void your bladder, and it requires three things to go on at the same time. Two are involuntary and one is voluntary. So you have the contraction of the detrusor muscle and the internal urethral sphincter. These are both autonomic nervous system. And then you have the opening of the external sphincter by the somatic or voluntary nervous system. So this is one that you learn to control. So when you're potty training, you learn how to control that external urethral sphincter and void your bladder. Now, micturition happens again. Let me go get my eraser again. So as your bladder is filling up with urine, it's going to start to fill up the bladder, and it's a sac, and it will stretch. And there are nerve endings in the bladder, and as it stretches, that will send these stretch signals, and that stretching signals are sent to your brain, and that's a sign to your brain that, hey, my bladder is full, I probably need to void and empty it. And so it will continue to stretch, and you can override that. So, sometimes you'll get, ooh, I feel like I might need to go to the bathroom. But you kind of ignore it and it'll go away. But there will come a point where those stretch signals are just going to get more and more frequent, more and more intense, and you just can't override it anymore. So you usually have a little bit of time for those signals to let you know you need to go, and you can override it till eventually the bladder's so full that the signals are very intense, very painful, and you need to go to the bathroom. And then you go to the restroom and you have control over that external sphincter, and you can void your bladder. All right, so it is that's where you learn those signals. You learn the stretch signals, you learn the intensity of those signals, and then you learn how much longer you've got before you're not going to be able to control the external sphincter anymore, and your bladder's going to be so full that it's just going to release on its own. All right, so that's all I'm going to talk about now, just that quick overview of what urine is and micturition. For those of you who maybe know someone with bladder spasms or bladder problems, there's a lot of information on the internet about that, and I encourage you always to go on the internet and if something is interesting to you, to learn more about it. Thank you.